The howling winds of Wyoming territory carried more than just the bite of winter that December evening in 1876. They delivered a desperate soul to Kieran Young's doorstep. The knock was so faint he almost mistook it for another branch scraping against his cabin's weathered walls. But something pulled him from his chair by the fire, some instinct that told him this wasn't the wind's doing. Kieran crossed the room in 3 long strides, rifle in hand, a habit born from 8 years of solitude in the foothills of the Grand Tetons. Trust came at a premium in these parts, especially for a man with his past. When he swung open the door, the harsh wind nearly tore it from his grip. But it wasn't the cold that stole his breath, it was her. A woman barely standing, her face pale as the snow collecting on her shoulders. Her lips were blue, her body trembling violently beneath a threadbare coat that provided little shelter from the elements. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible above the wind's howl. Her eyes, deep brown and desperate, met his for just a moment before they rolled back, and she collapsed forward. Kieran caught her before she hit the ground. He hoisted her slight frame into his arms, kicked the door closed, and carried her to the buffalo hide rug before the hearth. The stranger's skin felt like ice against his calloused hands. He worked quickly, removing her snow-soaked coat and boots, wrapping her in wool blankets from his bed. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but remained closed. In the firelight, he could see her face clearly, for the first time gaunt with hunger, but beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten. Dark hair tumbled around her shoulders as he positioned a pillow beneath her head. Kieran moved to the kitchen area, ladling venison stew from the pot that hung over the fire. He returned to find her eyes open, watching him warily. "You fainted," he explained, kneeling beside her. "Here it is hot, so take small sips." Her trembling hands reached for the bowl, but she lacked the strength to hold it. Wordlessly, Kieran supported the bowl and helped her drink. "Thank you," she murmured after a few sips had brought color back to her lips. "I thought I would die out there." "What is your name?" Kieran asked. "Lydia," she replied. "Lydia Thornton, Kieran Young." He nodded toward the stew. "Drink more, then rest." She complied, taking several more sips before exhaustion overtook her again. As she drifted to sleep, Kieran studied her face, noticing the gold band on her left hand. A married woman then. But where was her husband? And what had driven her to his remote cabin in such desperate condition? Kieran settled into his chair across the room, rifle across his lap. Though she seemed harmless enough, experience had taught him caution. He would keep watch through the night. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window when Lydia stirred again. Kieran had dozed off despite his intentions, and her soft cough brought him instantly alert. "Water," she requested, her voice stronger than the previous night. He fetched a cup from the pump by the sink and brought it to her. This time she managed to hold it herself. "I owe you an explanation," she said after drinking deeply. "You owe me nothing," Kieran replied, "but I reckon there is a story behind how you ended up half frozen at my door." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "My husband Thomas and I were heading to Oregon. We had a wagon." Her voice broke. "Indians attacked 3 days ago. Thomas told me to run while he tried to hold them off. I heard the shots, then nothing. I have been walking ever since, trying to find help." Kieran's jaw tightened. Something about her story didn't sit right with him. The nearest Indian troubles had been reported over 100 miles south. But her grief seemed genuine enough, and regardless of the truth, she clearly needed help. "I am sorry for your loss," he said simply. "You can stay until you are well enough to travel. The nearest town is Jackson, 2 days' ride from here." "Thank you," Lydia whispered. "I have nothing to offer in return. I am not asking for payment." Over the next few days, Lydia regained her strength. Kieran hunted and tended his small herd of cattle while she recovered, keeping a respectful distance. Each evening, however, they shared meals by the fire, and slowly she began to tell him more about herself. "Thomas and I married last spring," she explained one night as they ate rabbit stew. He had dreams of starting a farm in the Willamette Valley, said it was the most fertile land in the country. It is good land, Kieran agreed. Spent some time there after the war. Lydia studied him with interest. You fought in the war, Kieran nodded once. Union cavalry. Saw things no man should see. Is that why you live alone, so far from everything? His eyes met hers, and for a moment, he considered telling her the whole truth about the nightmares that still plagued him, about the bank robbery in Denver that had gone wrong, about the man he had killed in self-defense whose brothers had sworn to hunt him down. But he merely shrugged. I prefer the quiet, he said. As December deepened, the snow piled higher around the cabin. Kieran knew travel to Jackson would be impossible until the passes cleared, likely not until March. He didn't mind the company as much as he'd expected. Lydia proved herself useful, mending his clothes and keeping the cabin tidier than it had been in years. One evening, as a particularly fierce blizzard raged outside, Kieran returned from the barn to find Lydia examining the worn photograph he kept hidden in his desk drawer. I am sorry, she said quickly, replacing it. I was looking for paper to write down some recipes. Kieran remained silent for a long moment, then sighed. That is my family, taken in '61 before I left for the war. Lydia's eyes widened. You have children. Had, he corrected, removing his snow-covered coat. Elizabeth died of fever while I was fighting at Shiloh. Our daughter, Sarah, followed her 3 weeks later. My sister wrote to tell me, but the letter took months to reach me. I am so sorry, Lydia whispered. Kieran hung his coat and moved to the fire, trying to warm hands that suddenly felt colder than the snow outside. It has been 15 years. The pain dulls, but it never leaves. That night, something shifted between them. Perhaps it was their shared grief, or the howling storm that made the world beyond the cabin walls seem non-existent. Whatever the cause, when Lydia placed her hand on his arm as she bid him good night, Kieran felt something stir within him that he had thought long dead. Christmas arrived with clear skies and brutal cold. Kieran rose before dawn and went hunting, returning mid-morning with a wild turkey. He entered the cabin to find Lydia had fashioned crude decorations from pine boughs and red berries. Merry Christmas, she said with a tentative smile. I hope you do not mind. It felt wrong to let the day pass unmarked. Kieran was surprised to find he didn't mind at all. It looks nice. That evening, after a feast of roast turkey and potatoes, Kieran presented Lydia with a small carved wooden box he had been working on in secret. It is not much, he said gruffly. Lydia's fingers traced the intricate design of pine trees he had etched into the lid. It is beautiful, she whispered. I have nothing for you. Your company is gift enough, he replied, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. Later, as they sat by the fire drinking coffee laced with a precious spoonful of sugar, Lydia spoke of her life before Thomas, of growing up the daughter of a Philadelphia merchant, of her parents' disapproval when she married a man with Western ambitions. They disowned me, she said softly. Said I would regret following a dreamer to the wilderness. A bitter laugh escaped her. I suppose they were right. Do you regret it? Kieran asked. Lydia stared into the flames. No, despite everything, no, there is a freedom here that Philadelphia could never offer. Her eyes met his. Have you ever felt trapped by others' expectations? Kieran nodded slowly. After the war, everyone expected me to crumble from grief. Maybe I did for a time, but eventually I chose this life. It is simple, but it is mine. Is it lonely? Yes, he admitted, until recently. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Lydia looked away first, her cheeks flushed. I should retire. Thank you for the lovely Christmas. January brought slightly milder weather but deeper snow. Kieran taught Lydia to shoot his spare rifle, insisting she needed to protect herself in the wilderness. She proved a quick study, her aim impressively accurate after just a few lessons. You have done this before, he observed one afternoon as she hit a distant tree trunk for the third time in a row. A shadow crossed her face. My father believed women should know how to defend themselves, one of the few things we agreed upon. As the weeks passed, Kieran found himself increasingly drawn to Lydia. He admired her resilience, her willingness to learn the harsh realities of frontier life. Yet he kept a careful distance, reminding himself that she was a recent widow, still wearing another man's ring. February arrived with a thaw that turned the snow to slush during the day, only to freeze again at night, creating treacherous conditions. On one such evening, Kieran returned from checking his trap lines to find Lydia standing outside the cabin, staring at the mountains with a troubled expression. "Something wrong?" he asked, approaching her. She started as if caught in a guilty act. "No, just enjoying the sunset," but her eyes betrayed her. Kieran had become adept at reading her expressions over the past weeks, and something was clearly bothering her. "Lydia," he said gently. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." She turned to him, conflict evident in her face. "I have not been entirely truthful with you, Kieran." His body tensed, but he kept his expression neutral. "Go on, Thomas." She swallowed hard. "There were no Indians." "He died of typhoid fever 3 weeks before I reached your cabin. We were traveling with a wagon train, but after he died, the others wanted nothing to do with me. They feared contagion." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "They left me with some supplies and continued west. I wandered for days before the blizzard hit." Relief washed over Kieran. Of all the secrets he had imagined, this seemed minor in comparison. "Why did you not simply tell me this?" "I was ashamed," she admitted, "and afraid you would turn me away if you knew I had been near sickness. I panicked that night at your door." She looked up at him, eyes pleading. "Can you forgive me?" Kieran stepped closer, his hand reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. "There is nothing to forgive. You did what you needed to survive." Something in his touch broke the last of her reserve. Lydia moved into his arms, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. Kieran held her, his chin resting on her head, saying nothing but offering silent comfort. That night, as they sat before the fire, the air between them felt charged with unspoken feelings. Kieran knew he should maintain his distance. She was still grieving, still vulnerable. But when she moved to sit beside him on the bench, her shoulder touching his, he could not bring himself to pull away. "I never expected to feel this way again," Lydia said softly, her eyes on the flames. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of me died too." Kieran's heart hammered in his chest. "What way is that?" She turned to face him, gathering her courage. "Alive, hopeful?" She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Drawn to someone." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, all Kieran's carefully constructed barriers crumbled. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened as years of loneliness gave way to desperate need. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since New Year's," he confessed. A smile tugged at Lydia's lips. "I have wanted you to since Christmas." The weeks that followed were the happiest Kieran had known since before the war. They fell into a comfortable routine, hunting, cooking, talking by the fire long into the night. Lydia removed her wedding ring, storing it in the wooden box Kieran had given her. "A chapter closed," she explained, "but not forgotten." As March approached, however, a growing tension underlay their happiness. The snow was melting rapidly, and soon the trails to Jackson would be passable. Neither spoke of what would happen then, but the question hung between them. One evening, as they lay together in the narrow bed that they now shared, Kieran finally broached the subject. "The pass will be clear within the week." Lydia's body stiffened beside him. "Yes, I suppose it will. You will need to decide what you want to do," he continued carefully. "I can take you to Jackson. From there, you could return east to your family or continue west as you planned." She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No," he answered honestly, "but I would not keep you here out of obligation." "Obligation." Lydia's voice rose slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" Kieran sat up beside her. "I think you found yourself in desperate circumstances and I was the only option available. Now that spring is coming, you have choices again." "My choice is you," she said firmly, "if you will have me." The simplicity of her declaration stole his breath. Lydia, you should know, I am not the man you think I am. Then tell me who you are, and so he did. He told her about the bank robbery he had witnessed in Denver 3 years earlier, how he had intervened when the robbers started shooting, killing one of them, a man named James Harlow. How James's brothers, notorious outlaws themselves, had vowed to hunt him down. How he had fled north, changing his name and isolating himself in this remote cabin. I live with the knowledge that they might find me someday, he concluded. It is no life for a woman. Lydia listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she took his hands in hers. You saved innocent lives that day. You have nothing to be ashamed of. The Harlows do not see it that way. They are dangerous men, Lydia. So we will be careful, she replied, but I will not let fear of what might happen rob us of happiness now. Her determination humbled him. You would truly stay, even knowing the risk. I would. She squeezed his hands. Unless you do not want me to, Kieran pulled her into his arms. I want nothing more in this world. The next morning, Kieran rode to a neighboring homestead 10 miles away, the closest thing to neighbors he had. The Abbott family had always respected his privacy, but he maintained cordial relations with them, occasionally trading goods or information. Martha Abbott, a stern woman in her 50s, listened as Kieran explained his situation, omitting the details about his past but making it clear that he and Lydia wished to marry. Bring her here on Sunday, Martha said finally. My husband can perform the ceremony. He was a minister back in Ohio before we came west. Kieran thanked her and rode home with a lighter heart than he'd had in years. When he told Lydia the news, she threw her arms around his neck, laughing with joy. Sunday feels very far away, she said, her eyes sparkling. For days, he agreed, holding her close. For days until you become Mrs. Young. The wedding was simple but meaningful. Martha Abbott had decorated her home's small parlor with early spring wildflowers, and her husband performed a traditional ceremony. The Abbotts' 3 teenage children served as witnesses, clearly delighted by the unexpected romance. Lydia wore her best dress, the one she had arrived in, now carefully mended and cleaned. Kieran had ridden all the way to Jackson the day before, returning with a gold band that now gleamed on her finger. I never thought I would marry again, Lydia confessed as they rode home together, her seated before him on his horse. Especially not to a rugged mountain man. Kieran laughed, his arm tightening around her waist. And I never thought a Philadelphia lady would be content in my humble cabin. It is not the cabin that makes me content, she replied, turning to kiss his cheek. It is the man inside it. Spring brought new life to the mountain valley. Kieran and Lydia worked together to expand the vegetable garden, build a chicken coop, and repair the cabin's roof. They made plans to add a room before winter returned, just in case, Lydia said with a meaningful smile that made Kieran's heart race. In late April, a letter arrived via a passing trader. It was addressed to Lydia from her parents in Philadelphia. With trembling hands, she opened it. They want to reconcile, she said after reading it twice. They heard about Thomas from the wagon master who returned east. They thought I had died too, until recently when someone from the train wrote to tell them I had headed north with a widower. She looked up at Kieran. How they got that story I cannot imagine. People talk, Kieran said with a shrug, fill in gaps with their imagination. They want me to come home, she continued. They promised to welcome me with open arms. Kieran felt his stomach tighten. Do you want to go? Lydia carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. This is my home now. But I would like to write to them, let them know I am well and happy. She paused. Would you mind if they visited someday, when the trail is good? Relief flooded through him. Of course not, they are your family. You are my family now, she corrected him. They would be visitors. As summer approached, their life settled into a pleasant routine. Kieran taught Lydia more about tracking and hunting, while she introduced refinements to their home that he had never considered: curtains at the windows, wildflower arrangements on the table, songs in the evening. In June, they traveled to Jackson for supplies. It was Lydia's first visit to the growing town, and she delighted in the simple luxuries available: fabric for new clothes, books, even candy from the general store. Kieran watched her happiness with satisfaction, pleased he could provide these small joys. As they loaded their purchases onto their packhorse, a man approached them, the town's telegraph operator. "Mr. Young?" he inquired. Kieran tensed immediately. Few people in Jackson knew him by name. "Yes." "Message came for you last week." He handed over a folded paper. "Ryder from Cheyenne brought it." Kieran thanked him, tucking the paper into his pocket without reading it. Only when they were well outside town did he pull it out, Lydia watching him with concern. "The Harlow brothers were killed in a shootout with federal marshals near Santa Fe," he read aloud, his voice tight with disbelief. "Their gang was attempting to rob a bank. No survivors." "Oh, Kieran," Lydia breathed, reaching for his hand. "It is over." He nodded slowly, the full impact still sinking in. "We are free," he said finally. "Truly free." That night, they celebrated their newfound security with a bottle of whiskey Kieran had purchased in town. As they sat on the cabin's small porch watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness, Lydia rested her head on his shoulder. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Something in her tone made him turn to look at her. "What is it?" "I visited the doctor while you were buying supplies in Jackson." A smile spread across her face. "We will need that extra room sooner than we thought. By Christmas, there will be 3 of us in this cabin." Joy unlike anything Kieran had felt in nearly 2 decades washed over him. He pulled Lydia into his arms, his hands cradling her still flat stomach with reverence. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he replied honestly. "When you knocked on my door that night, half frozen and starving, I had no idea you were bringing my future with you." Lydia laughed softly. "And I had no idea the gruff cowboy who opened his cabin would also open his heart." The summer passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. They added the new room to the cabin, Kieran working tirelessly to make it perfect. Lydia sewed baby clothes from soft flannel and knitted tiny blankets. In September, her parents arrived for a visit, their initial skepticism about her mountain home giving way to genuine approval when they saw how happy their daughter was. Their daughter, Emma Elizabeth Young, was born on a snowy December evening, almost exactly 1 year after Lydia had first knocked on Kieran's door. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes, and from her first cry she held both their hearts completely in her tiny hands. As Christmas approached, Kieran stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching Lydia rock their daughter before the fire. The scene before him, one he had never dared hope for again, filled him with profound gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" Lydia asked, looking up to find him watching them. "About how one knock on a door changed everything," he replied, crossing the room to join his family. "About how sometimes the things we think we have lost forever find their way back to us in unexpected forms." Lydia smiled up at him. "I was lost that night, in more ways than one." "We both were," Kieran said, kneeling beside her chair to place a gentle kiss on Emma's forehead. "But not anymore." Outside, snow fell silently over the mountain valley, covering their small ranch in a blanket of white. But inside the cabin that had once housed only solitude and regret, warmth and love had taken permanent residence. The lonely cowboy and the starving widow had found in each other not just survival, but a second chance at happiness. Neither had believed possible proof that even in the harsh wilderness of Wyoming territory, hearts could heal and love could bloom again.